Okay, happy Thursday, everybody. Hope you're enjoying your cold day off again. As promised, we are going to do the lecture notes for today online. Hopefully, this doesn't take too long. I'm anticipating this to take 20 to 25, 30 minutes, something like that. So, reminders before we start. Your OLA 4, which is on Chapter 3, is due Friday. Remember, that's your Canvas quiz. Don't forget about it. Market opportunity, that's that group assignment. So, telling me what your idea is for your startup. And then your logo, that's due Sunday by midnight on Canvas. You do have another homework assignment coming up. It's due Wednesday, and this is an exam review assignment. So take a look. It's in next week's module. It's just asking you several questions. It's basically I'm forcing you to study, and it'll help you on the exam, which is next Thursday. And remember, where you're taking that exam. If you're in a morning class, it will be in our normal classroom. If you're an afternoon class, it will be in the computer lab in Burke downstairs. So, group contracts are also due next week, and that will be due Wednesday, so February 6th. Um, Exam again next week on Thursday. Okay, so today we're going to start with Chapter 4, which is all about coming up with research, using data, and we'll start off with our quote for the day. Um, Basically, we live in a world of data. It's awesome and challenging as a marketer at the same time. So, like never before, I can gain insight into my potential and in my existing customers. It's a challenge because it can be hard to identify what's important and how to translate that data into useful information and insight because there's so much of it. Also, this unprecedented amount of data has other challenges. How do we obtain this data? What are the ethics involved with how we get it and what we do with it? Where do we store it, etc. So it's an awesome opportunity, and this quote I think captures it well because when we use data well, it can lead to useful insight into what our customers want today, what they'll need tomorrow, and how we can improve our offerings and our marketing mix for the future. So, the ability to take data, to be able to understand it, to process it, to extract value from it, to visualize it, to communicate it, that's going to be a hugely important skill in the next decades. Okay, so we're setting the tone for our discussion today. We're talking about customer insights. We're going to start out with an example. So, one growing market that taps into some of the more pro environmental trends that we've been talking about. So, pro environment, sustainability trends, the outdoor goods market is really tapping into that segment. So, it can be really creative, the marketing, and we're going to take a look at a quick video promotion from the North Face to start out. Okay, so let me get back to our slides quickly. Okay, so now that we've seen this ad, let's use North Face as an example to help us better understand a little more about why data, information, and customer insights are different from each other for marketers. So, to arrive at this branding and the value proposition that we saw in this ad, North Face probably had a lot of data that they sifted through in order to develop this. Okay, so what kind of data would they need to create an advertisement like this? And obviously, we're not in class, so I can't ask you, so I'm going to tell you. Um, we need to understand the purchasing behavior of past and current customers, right? And understand what kind of gear that they've bought, and you could see some of that featured in there. You might have also recognized some of the faces in there. There are some North Face sponsored athletes in that advertisement. We would also want to look at data around green and outdoor articles, so green marketing, maybe some blogs, social media posts, data about the success of previous outdoor campaigns. So, as marketers, we'll have data from all of the campaigns that we've had in the past. So, increase of purchasing certain gear, or impressions, or engagement, stuff like that. But data alone doesn't really help North Face make decisions because it's not organized and interpreted in a way that lends itself to decision making. So we'll need to look at, along with that internal information from past campaigns, we'll need to look at some external factors. So some external factors that could affect the kind of advertising we do. Well, reports on purchasing trends. So what's going on in that external environment. We would want to look at major trends for outdoors and green marketing, see what competitors are doing, maybe some case studies about the characteristics of successful campaigns. So the environment changes, and we need to make sure that we keep up with those changes. Okay? So this can still be a lot of information for decision makers to take in. So there's often individual or team of individuals who what they do for their job is take in all kinds of information and then try to boil it down into a few actionable points. So when we were watching this, we noticed that it was pretty diverse. There were people doing all kinds of activities outside, all seasons, all types of people. There were a lot of action shots here, so not really static. People were doing some pretty crazy things. So they found that was probably an insight they gained from doing their research. And a lot of prominent outdoor scenery, so some places you may have recognized as well. Okay, so when we're looking for something useful, we're going to use data from different sources, information that we can find about competitors, internal and external information, and then our customer insights. So our customer insights, what are purchasing trends, etc. So when we're looking at organizing some of our data, we have some options that can help us out here. So the Marketing Information System, MIS, not Management Information System today, the MIS represents a system that's designed to aggregate and make useful and available information from different sources. So we've got 4 different sources that we're looking at today: internal company data, marketing intelligence, market research, and then other acquired databases. And since we're on an outdoors kick, we're going to look at Bass Pro Shops. So Bass Pro Shops is a large retailer in the hunting and fishing market. We've got similar places around here. We've got Field and Stream, I think, in Erie, and then some bigger cities have different Bass Pro Shops, or I don't know, some of those other outdoor ones, Cabela's, etc. So we're going to take a look at how they would find information that they needed if they were going to decide that, hey, let's make a placement decision and locate a new store in Erie, PA. So we might start by taking a look at internal data, so that internal company data here, and compare demographics and the recreational pull of some place like Erie to other stores and locations in their system. So maybe there's another store that's in a similar location as Erie, similar size city, similar demographics, similar location and proximity to water, like the lake, something like that. Okay, and we'd want to answer or ask questions like, does it have the right profile? So thinking of Erie, does it have the right profile of local and visiting sportsmen to justify having a location here? And we would look at those prior store results. We'd also maybe take a look at our market intelligence. So, marketing intelligence, we would look at and see what available information we have on the external environment in Erie, like other competitive stores, so like the Field and Stream that we have, maybe those other sporting goods stores. We'd look at the pricing of retail space in Erie. Hey, how much is it going to cost for us to build and maintain an outdoor retail place? Or we'd look at other information like regulations. Okay, what is the regulations for setting up a shop in Erie, etc. We also would want to look into market research to see what kind of insights that might offer. So we could pay an external company. So there's some groups, Experience Simmons is an example of one, and we would get a syndicated research report on consumer buying behavior. So our market research, what are people in Erie buying? What kind of activities are they interested in? Okay, what other geographic characteristics would we look at? Or maybe we would, during our market research, maybe we'd send some surveys out. So some surveys in the mail to our target market and get our own custom research. And we'll talk about the different types of research a little bit later on. We might also look for the ability of a database that has customer information and send out mailers announcing new location to that. So we might have some information already in a database. We might acquire some. And we also have other things that we can do. We might use our marketing information system with a marketing decision support system, which would include some sophisticated wow, it's hard to talk today, statistical modeling software tools. So, putting in more data and then figuring out what will happen, doing some predictive analysis. Okay, so marketing research, it's all about answering questions, and of course we've got a process that we're going to go through just like any other process we've talked about so far. So we need to gain some actionable insights to make decisions about new products, adapting our marketing mix, responding to important events in the environment, etc. The very first thing, though, that we need to do is define the important question that we're trying to answer, and then we can come up with different aspects of the research to deliver useful insights. Okay, so we're going to use another example to demonstrate what this is, and we'll start defining our research problem. So we all probably remember a couple years ago when something a little fishy was going on with the new Samsung smartphone. Remember, it was exploding and catching fire. So we're going to take a quick look at a news clip just to see what was going on and then set the stage for a discussion. So we're just going to watch a little bit of this.
This press conference is ongoing at this point, but what we have at this point from the handset division of Samsung Electronics is that they are going to be replacing all of their Galaxy Note 7 products. Now, this is a smartphone, a larger smartphone that they released about 2 weeks ago, and there have been some online reports and some claims from some consumers that they were having battery issues. There had been photos posted of charred handsets as well, claims that they had, in some cases, set fire to themselves or exploded. Now, those individual cases we can't independently confirm, but Samsung now confirming that after analysis, they can say that there is an issue with the battery cell in a small number of the products that they have. So what they've decided to do, they say that they're going to halt the sale of this product, saying they want to put consumers' safety first. They say they will replace all of the Galaxy Note 7 products with a new product, regardless of when it was purchased, saying the preparations will take a couple of weeks and they want to replace all those handsets as soon as possible. Interestingly, they haven't used the word recall, but this sounds like a recall to me. Max?
Okay, so Samsung has a pretty big issue here. There's all sorts of issues that will affect them in both the long term and the short term. So let's focus on one aspect of what might be really important to understand, the long-term effect of this issue on how consumers will perceive the quality of Samsung's mobile devices, so smartphones, tablets, etc. So for Samsung, what would you want to know about this problem? Okay, a couple things we might want to know when we're trying to figure out what our specific objectives, our goals are. How have perceptions changed of the Samsung brand? How have quality perceptions changed? And what can we do about it? So we'd also want to identify the key groups of people that we're interested in learning about, so identifying our consumer population. And for this, let's say we'll have two populations. One, existing customers. They're important because we'd want to know if they're likely to purchase again. And the other group would be potential customers. We'd want to know about these because they'd be important and might represent customers we would need to keep growing our market share. Okay, and the other thing we need to consider when we're coming up with our problems is considering the environment. So this was a hot button issue and had some potentially long-term ramifications, so we'd likely want to move quickly to get this sort of information that we need to be enabled to respond quickly to this problem. The next thing we do is determine the research design, so step 2. And research design is a plan that specifies what information marketers will collect and what type of study we're going to do. And one of the first important decisions that we need to decide is whether we're going to be relying on secondary data only or if we're going to use primary data. So secondary data, that's data that's been collected for some other purpose other than the problem at hand. It might be useful to get us started because it's normally inexpensive to get our hands on and it already exists, so we can get it right away. And since this is a hot topic right now, there might be some polls that were available from the news outlets trying to see what people think about the phones exploding and other industry sources that might be a good place to start. It's not likely to fully answer our questions that we have because it was collected for some other purpose. So once we do our secondary data, we'll likely be pushed in the direction of primary data, and primary data is new data that we collect to answer our specific questions. So primary data, data from research conducted to make a specific decision. And a way to collect some of this primary data that we have is exploratory research. And this would involve doing some interviewings. So we'd want to do an in-depth interview of a few customers who fit the profile of a typical consumer, and we could do this through a focus group, which is a discussion among a small group of consumers that is led by a trained moderator. And it might not be a bad idea to start with some exploratory research to start answering our questions, and this should give us some sufficient insight to know exactly the right way to ask more specific questions in future research. And once we're done with that, we'd probably move on to descriptive research. And with the insights from our focus group, we would start thinking about descriptive research, which we would involve questionnaires to get more quantitative data so that we could track people's responses over time as well. So with Samsung, we're thinking about quality perception questions. We'd want to conduct some descriptive research and use Likert type style questions. So you've seen these before. So, on a scale of 1 to 10, how do you feel about Samsung products? Okay. And we'd want to use some of the dimensions that we developed from our focus group as well. We'd want to keep an eye on how effective responses have been by keeping an eye on the questions that we've developed for the foreseeable future so that we can then track responses over time. So descriptive and then causal, once we have got some more concrete data, we would maybe look at this where we're trying to establish a cause and effect relationship. So experiments are a really common way of doing this and would fit really well with our questions here, trying to see how people feel about Samsung. So we could share some promotions that are aimed at curtailing the effects of the event. So trying to say, hey, this isn't going to happen again. And then we could show those promotions to people and see which kind of promotion would improve people's perceptions of the brand. So we would measure what they feel about the brand before, show them a promotion, and then ask them some questions again to see if our promotion was effective. Okay, so quick retention check, and you can't turn to your neighbor, but try to answer these in your head. Explain the difference between primary and secondary data. Feel free to pause and go back and listen to it again if you want to. All right, the next step. Step 3. We are going to choose the data, the method to collect the data, so our data collection method. And there's a few ways. We've got survey methods that we could use, questionnaires, telemarketing, Mall, Intercept, person with a clipboard. We've got online research, so there's a couple things online. There's a thing called MTurk that's through Amazon, and basically what it is market research can post these one-off tasks that require some human intelligence. Other online research, well, we have cookies, which are snippets of code that are inserted by the website sponsor into a web surfer's hard drive, and it allows the site to track the surfer's moves. So cookies essentially will remember the details of a visits to page. So we can look and use something like Google Analytics to see people's behavior online and follow them on our pages. There's also predictive technology where we use shopping patterns of large number of people to determine which products are likely to be purchased. So sometimes maybe if you're watching Netflix and you have the recommendations, well, that's a type of predictive technology. You've watched these shows in the past, other people watch these shows, and they also watch these shows. Same thing when you're ordering stuff on Amazon, you have those suggested items, and we're using this predictive technology to come up with that. So we can also observe people. We can do eye tracking. So we could see how, an example, when in grocery stores set up and design, we can analyze where people's eyes go first and how we can best place things. But we could also look at people's eyes on a website and figure out what is the direction that they're reading the page, etc. Okay, what else here? And predictive technology, I already talked about that one. Okay, so once we've collected our data, we've figured out our method, the next thing we need to do, or while we're collecting our data, is make sure that we have valid data, it's reliable, and it's also representative. So let's go through this, and these are the three main criteria that we use to judge the trustworthiness of our data. Validity is the extent to which the research measures what it was intended to measure. Reliability is the extent to which research measurement techniques are free of errors. And representativeness is the extent to which consumers in a study are similar to the larger group in which the organization has an interest. Okay, so let's take a look at our questions for Samsung again, and we'll look at the question of how did the battery event affect quality perceptions at Samsung. So there's two possible items that we might consider if we're Samsung. Okay, let's take a look, and we'll explain validity here in a minute. So how has the battery event affected quality perceptions at Samsung? And here's a couple questions we might use to try to measure this. How do we feel about Samsung? So using a Likert scale, 1 very negatively to 5 very positively. Or Samsung products compare favorably to LG products on product quality. 1 strongly disagree, 5 strongly agree. Okay, so remember, validity is all about measuring what we actually intended to measure. And what are we trying to measure? We're trying to measure this. How has battery event affected quality perceptions at Samsung? All right, so if we're trying to measure that, which of these questions would be a better question to measure that? So which one is more valid? Well, we're thinking about the quality perceptions. So which one of these talks about product quality? Samsung products compare favorably to LG products on product quality, right? So that one would be more valid. It's all about measuring what we actually intend to measure. Okay, so here's a couple other questions we can look at. Question 1. How do you feel about the quality of Samsung products today? Question 2. How do you feel about the quality of Samsung products? Okay, one of these has the word today here, same thing, 1 to 5, 1 to 5. So when we're thinking about reliability, the second part of our trustworthiness of our research, reliability focuses on trying to reduce the amount of error in how we measure something. So it can focus on the reliability of a group of related measures or the consistency of responses to a question over time. So which of these two do you think would yield greater consistency over time? Okay, so let's think about this one a little bit more. So we might use this type of research to measure people's perceptions from year to year, right? So which of these would get more at that specific question? This one. How do we measure the quality of Samsung how do you feel about the quality of Samsung products today? And it's asking you about a specific point in time. Okay? This one is more vague, right? How do you feel about the quality of Samsung products? Well, maybe in the past I've had a really good experience and I feel good about it. Using this today word gets more specific and that's more reliable. And the last part Remember, I'm going to go back here. Follow me for a second. So we've got validity, reliability. The last part is representativeness, and this deals with whether our data collection approach leads to a set of participants that provide an accurate picture of the larger population that they come from. So we want to make sure that the samples we use when we're doing this research represent the larger groups of existing and our potential customers. Okay. So the remaining, let's skip through these again. The remaining market research steps. First one, designing our sample. I'll come back to this in a minute. Designing our sample. Who are we collecting the data from? Okay, so Samsung, we're trying to represent our two potential populations here, our existing customers and potential customers. And we want to have a collection, a data collection of groups that represent both of those, right? It's not going to be possible to survey every existing Samsung customer, so we want to have a representative group. And this is what sampling is really all about, figuring out how to get at a representative but smaller subset of a larger population that we're interested in, which saves us time and money, right? We don't want to do a census data collection. The next step, number 5, is to collect the data. And we want to try to ensure that the data is collected in a consistent manner, so we have the same look and feel to an online survey, or we have the same kind of environment if we're doing an experiment, so the person asks the same questions. I mean, even down to having the room be the same temperature, the same time of day. We want to make sure that there aren't any external factors that are going to affect our data collection. Number 6 is analyzing and interpreting the data. And what we're going to do here is decipher the insights that we've generated from the data. And to do that, we'll start slicing the data into smaller chunks so that we can better understand it. So this is where we might segment things a little bit more. So in our example I wrote up here, even among these existing customers, we might break down the quality perception results into smaller segments like male versus female or heavy purchasers versus light purchasers to see if there's a difference in between any of this, and we can see if there's anything that we'd want to act on. Okay. Last step is to prepare the research report. This is where we're going to compile all of that data and summarize our key insights, and this will get presented to important stakeholders like the brand manager, or whoever is in charge of the marketing decisions. And this information, this data that we collected, will likely get added to our marketing information system that we talked about earlier. Okay, that's it for today. I will see you Tuesday. We'll review and recap, and then we will have our trivia review for the exam on Friday.